So now that we understand how to work with some of the basic layer features and functions, let's go ahead and look at some of the advanced features and functions. To begin with here, we have our composite method right here at this drop-down list. And you can see that this is a fairly long drop-down list. As a matter of fact, we have a scroll bar in it. And this first section of options here for our composite method are all painter-specific composite methods. And below that, we have more of the standard composite methods that you'll find in pretty much any graphics application. The common one that we normally be using would be, of course, normal. And normal is basically the exact same thing as default. They pretty much work exactly identical to each other. Now, if we go ahead and click dissolve, which is a standard composite method, you'll see that what we get is sort of a noise pattern. And if we reduce the opacity, what we're effectively doing is we're putting more and more transparent noise into that mix. I rarely ever find a purpose for using dissolve. Go ahead now to the next one and multiply. Multiply is going to allow us to take any pixels that are below the pixels that we currently have, and we're going to darken them by whatever the pixel value is that we're currently using. This is a great way of making things darker, but also adding some color to what it is that you're making darker. Below that, we have screen. And the way screen works is it's going to lighten by whatever the pixel value is. So here we're basically lightening via the red color. And below that we have overlay, which is basically going to allow us to sort of darken a little bit, but more or less just cast the color of the red onto these areas here, but wherever it's lighter, it's not going to really have any kind of impact. And so on and so forth. We have soften, hard light, darken, lighten, difference, hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. We'll cover a few of these bottom ones here because they can be interesting. Color is a particularly interesting one. Basically what color does here is it's basically going to wipe out any of the underlying color, and it's only going to make those colors red no matter what their values are. If we do the exact opposite of color, which is luminosity, it's basically going to turn everything to grayscale, meaning that now the luminosity of the green, for instance, is the same luminosity that the red was. The luminosity of this yellowy orange is now the same luminosity of the red. And this can be sometimes useful as well for certain types of effects. So you may be saying to yourself, this is kind of an abstract concept, this concept of working with these composite methods. So let's just go ahead and close this document. And let's go ahead and open a document that I've put here in our Chapter 6 work files. It's composite example. And I want to show to you a practical example. Now this is a very quick little simple document that I created just to showcase how composite methods work here. So if we come over here to composite method, you'll see that we're using the gel composite method. We could, if we wanted to, go to default. And what we're seeing basically here is we have two layers. We have the base drawing that I've created here. And on this layer, I've basically created some shading using the colored pencils and the blenders to create a sort of a quick, sketchy looking shaded effect. I can use multiple different blending modes to get this effect of overlaying the two. Gel is the first one, but I could also use multiply. And I could also use something like darken to a certain degree. I can also use something like the luminosity if I wanted just to get the gray down. I could use something like the difference if I want to get more of a negative effect. So you can see just by playing with the different composite methods that you see right here in this drop-down list, you can have a lot of different effects. So I highly recommend that you just play with the different composite methods, and also don't forget to play with the opacity, because see here we're getting a completely different effect. If we take something like multiply, you'll see that now we're getting a much fainter look to that skin. It's multiplying less of itself down. And if we're doing something like default, here we can get kind of like a halfway blend between the two effects. So the idea with the different composite methods is that you're going to have a lot of flexibility in the ways that you blend your different painting elements together, as long as you also take into consideration the opacity. In addition to this, there's a whole other thing that you need to be considering, and that will be your composite depth. Now, the composite depth has to do with impasto, and I'll just create a new document here, like so, and zoom in a few times so that we can see what we're doing. And now I'm going to go to impasto, and I'm just going to get something like our smeary impasto. And I'm going to get a color, so let me just pick something like this. We're not too concerned about what we're doing. We just want to have a color, and maybe I'll get some green here, like so. so that we can see that we're getting both color and depth in our impasto, right? So let's say that now I want to paint impasto on a layer. Well, you can certainly do that. That is certainly something that you can do. Just go ahead and click New Layer. And now we have a new layer. And you can notice here that our composite depth is set to ignore. So as I begin to paint here, basically what it's going to do is it's going to continue to pile on that impasto, like so. If I come over here, right now you'll see that my composite depth has changed to add automatically as soon as I begin to paint with impasto. And that's the reason why my depth is piling on. If I wanted to, I could set it back to ignore. And what it'll do is it'll ignore that impasto. And if I turn off the opacity here, you'll see what I mean. It's basically turned off the impasto completely. So that's what the ignore is basically doing. But as soon as we paint with an impasto enabled brush, we're going to automatically go to add. The next one below add is subtract. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to carve in by how much ever the impasto is sticking out. It's going to allow us to carve into the underlying impasto. We can end up with some very sophisticated and complex visual effects this way. And then below that we have replace. And basically what replace does is it more or less keeps everything at an even level of impasto. This is a nice effect when you basically want to have the look as if you were painting everything on one layer, but in fact you are painting on multiple layers. And I'll just go ahead and create a new layer again. And remember, I'm automatically set to ignore, and as soon as I click, I get add automatically. So if I want to go to replace, I need to go ahead and select replace. And now you can see that just sort of merges right in as if I was painting all on one layer. So you want to definitely pay attention to the composite depth when you're working with the impasto brushes, because it can have a great deal of impact on what type of effect you're going to be achieving, whether you're using something like add on one layer and subtract on another. You can get some very, very complex impasto effects by playing with this composite depth. So the composite method and the composite depth are both very powerful layer blending modes to create effects that you really couldn't achieve on just a single layer or just on the canvas.